Yeah. So the
Good. Here's some ones in here.
Yeah.
blue.
Yeah.
You can do the gray or the. Let's choose the gray or.
I'm gonna do some of the ones up here. So there's a one, there's a one.
All right,
and
we're
I'm
on
gonna
now,
do the
Alan.
ones at the
Awesome.
bottom.
Okay, and now throw us on Facebook too.
I think the ones are finished down here.
This is all one. And these hands are one.
Are these ones?
Mm-hmm.
All right, I think we're good.
One. These ones are one.
There we go.
Hey, Mommy, listen to this.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this Friday edition of Walking Through History. My name is Nick Angel, and on the screen here in just a moment will be my friend Alan Siemenstrang, and we are happy to study along with you today from the book of Exodus as we continue our walk through the story that is provided to us from the history of the children of Israel. We have made our way through the book of Genesis, detailing where Israel has come from. And of course, beginning in Genesis chapter 12, we have this great promise given to Abraham concerning his seed growing into a great nation and inhabiting a great land. And through this nation and this land will come a great blessing upon all the people of the earth. We read at the beginning of Exodus that this nation that had grown from the family of Abraham, specifically the family of his grandson Jacob, or I guess great-grandson. No, it would be grandson Jacob, had grown exponentially within the land of Egypt. And unfortunately, the climate had changed within that land. The Pharaoh that had once looked upon these people favorably because of Joseph and his kindness and his leadership within Egypt, well, they quickly fell out of favor. And they cried out to the Lord, and the Lord has now sent a deliverer, Moses, and his brother Aaron, to come and to lead the people out of the land. Of course, they had to do it by the strong hand of God, who had to show his power to Pharaoh so that the people would be let go. The people have been let go from the land. That's what we studied in our last study together. Looked at the final plague and then the words from God through Moses to Pharaoh. And now it is time for the Israelites to exit the land. And what we're going to look at today is their exit routes. We're also going to look at the great scene that takes place concerning the Red Sea, the parting of the Red Sea, and the fate that falls upon Pharaoh and his army. And then we're going to close by looking at the Song of Moses as recorded for us, beginning in chapter 15 and going through chapter 15, verse 1, and going through chapter 21, excuse me. Happy and excited to get into this text with you today, and hope that you are finding yourself well on this Friday afternoon. And I'm excited to get into this text. Alan, good afternoon, buddy. Good to see you. Hope you're doing well today.
Oh, doing well. Just trying to survive over here with two little ones now. So
I'll tell you, the game does change. Once you add in the second one, the game changed because now you're having to play one-on-one defense. Before, you and Mel could tag team D on Annabelle, but now whenever a second one's added in there, got to go man to man. And if you ever get that third one, and I know that's something we're thinking about in our future too, getting a third one, then you got to go straight zone, and that's going to be tough for sure. The Lord bless his parents in that way, having to be 3-on-2 at that point. That's tough.
And Annabelle was beating us 1-on-2 already, so
hey,
she's got some backup now, so it's even worse.
Well, glad you're doing well. We're excited to get into the text today. We're going to be beginning in chapter 13 and verse 17. Exodus chapter 13 and verse 17 is where we're going to begin. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them along the road to the land of the Philistines, even though it was nearby. For God said the people will change their minds and return to Egypt if they face war. So he led the people around toward the Red Sea along the road of the wilderness, and the Israelites left the land of Egypt in battle formation. I think that's something important to notice here. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the Israelites swear a solemn oath, saying, God will certainly come to your aid. Then you must take my bones with you from this place. They set out from Succoth and camped in Etham on the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to lead them on their way during the day, and in a pillar of fire to give them light at night, so that they could travel day or night. And the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night never left its place in front of the people. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and camp in front of Pi Haroth, between Migdal and the sea. You must camp in front of Baal Zephon, facing it by the sea. Pharaoh will say of the Israelites, they are wandering around the land in confusion. The wilderness has boxed them in, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will pursue them. Then I will receive glory by means of Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So the Israelites did this. Alan, what I want to note first and foremost is that in this exit route that the Lord takes, or that the Lord is leading the people in, he doesn't take the most direct route, it seems. He doesn't take the easiest route, but he takes them on a different way so that they don't go into the Philistine land. Well, Alan, why does the text tell us, and really this is going to be, of course, foreknowledge is on the side of the Lord, but it seems to be, and what we're going to see in a few verses, is that the Lord knows these people. He knows that they're not exactly the strongest minded people. So he avoids this land so that they don't get scared. And what does that tell you? It's just about the mindset of these people and the way the Lord is going to have to deal with them. And really, what does that tell us about what we're going to be looking for in the future in regards to their trust and often lack of trust in God?
Well, the first thing is, I mean, the Lord's exactly right, because the exact same thing that he was worried about ends up happening a year, I guess, maybe, I forget how long it is until they get to Kadesh Barnea and the 12 spies are sent in. Well, the same thing happens that he was hoping that wouldn't. They got scared from looking at all the cities and all the great, the mighty men in the city, in the land of Canaan. So the Lord was right to not send them that way, because if they were, after a year of wandering in the wilderness and they still weren't ready, then of course right then they wouldn't have been ready to enter the land, at least militarily wise. But I think the main thing is, if you remember, it was foretold that they would go back to Mount Sinai already. They would go back to the mount that Moses met the Lord on. And two, I mean, just think about what happens between now and when the 12 spies are sent in and the people reject the word of the 10 spies later on in Numbers. I mean, they're given the law. So this time period is supposed to be basically a year or however long it is of preparation. Basically, they are a new nation. They've been born a new nation. So there is some time of growth, and specifically some time of growth into the type of people that God desires. I mean, in the time of Egypt, they needed to have someone just tell them who God is and what his name was. So how can they be God's people if they have just very little to no understanding about who he is? Well, that's what the point of the rest of Exodus, Leviticus, receiving the law during this time period was supposed to prepare them to enter into Canaan and be a holy people that God wants them to be.
Right. And often what we have to recognize in regards to our faiths is that the greatest faith that we can have is not going to come with great ease. I'm reminded of the number of times in the New Testament whenever inspired writers, I think about Paul in Romans chapter 5, I think about James in James chapter 1, when they talk about a mature faith, when they talk about someone who really trusts in God, someone who has built up perseverance and a strength to stand in their faith, that doesn't come from having things having things gone easy, but it comes whenever you face difficulties. And here, what we have to understand is that they're just not ready yet. They're not ready to face these difficulties. He knows that as soon as this happens, they go straight through this land of the Philistines. They're going to turn back. Well, what's he going to do? What is it that we see at the end of this text? That he's going to present them in such a way that Pharaoh is going to think that they're just wandering. He's going to think that they're lost. He's going to think that they don't know where they're going. And what's that going to do? Well, that's going to rile him up again. Again, what the Lord is doing here is he is using circumstances to move Pharaoh in a certain direction that is going to allow him then to show his power. And then that's the understanding we must take whenever we read these texts about, again, the Lord hardening Pharaoh's heart, or Pharaoh hardening his own heart, or his heart just being hard, just because that's the type of person that he was. The Lord is using Pharaoh. He is using the Egyptians as a tool to prove who he is. And I think, again, at the end of that text in verse number 4 of chapter 14, the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. I think one of the ways it's good to look at this text is to frame it as a battle. This is an assault that the Lord is making upon Egypt, which is seen as this great power within the land at this time. And everybody would see the power that a nation has. They would judge that based upon, or they would translate that into the power that the gods of that particular nation has. Therefore, if Egypt is having this great success within the land, if they are able to take over other people's lands and take over other people's, then that would be seen as the Egyptian gods being stronger than the gods of the people that have been overcome. Therefore, whenever we have God coming up here against the Egyptians, it is the God of this people, Israel. It is Yahweh against the gods of the Egyptians. And what has he shown to this point? That they are nothing before him, which I believe is why once we get to the Song of Moses in chapter 15 and verse number 11, that statement, Lord, who is like you among the gods, that's really needs to be understood as this power play that the Lord is making to show his superiority over any gods that might be among these peoples, especially the peoples of Egypt. Alan, I want to look for just a second at this verse 18, that the Israelites left the land of Egypt in battle formation. That's been a theme that we've seen here at the end of this Exodus story in chapter 12 and verse 17, chapter 12 and verse 41, and chapter 12 and verse 51. We read a number of times that the designs for their being brought out, and even the numbering of the people, is done according to their military divisions. So what I was just saying about this being a power play, do you think that is supported by this particular language that we see pertaining to the military divisions? Remember, this is going to be done so that all of the peoples will know that this people, the Israelites, and their God are mightier than anyone else. Tie that in what we're going to see at Jericho with Rahab. We've heard the power of your God. We know who you are. We're scared. Do you think that might be the way the writer of this text is phrasing this, so that it's seen in that way?
I would definitely agree. I mean, we've been talking this whole time about this bigger kind of spiritual battle that's taking place between God and the gods, bunny ears, gods of Egypt. I mean, that's what each of these plagues was designed to fight against, and just basically disprove their existence, because they could not stop the God of the Hebrews from desecrating their area, whether it be the Nile, whether it be the gods of certain animals, or the gods of fertility, or whatever. All of them were shown to be were emasculated and shown to be just nothing, because they could not do battle against God and his plagues. And same thing here, I think, when it talks about when it gives us the numbers of these troops. What does that really matter? How many troops are coming? I mean, the Israelites are not a military force. They're just a mass of people. They have no weapons. They've been slaves for generations. They have no battle experience that we know of. So why would we why would all this language about battle formation, and then I think we haven't read it yet, but in chapter 14 here in verse 6 and verse 7, I mean, it details the troops and the types of the details of the army that Egypt follows.
That's right.
600 of his best chariots. If you remember, how many Israelites did we read were leaving Egypt? Well, it talked about 600,000 men ready for war, basically. So you have 600, kind of I think supposed to match up against that 600,000. And that's just the best of the chariots right there. It also says all the rest of the chariots in verse 7 with officers in each one. And of course, it's talking about the whole army of Egypt. So this is not just 600 chariots. This is 600 of the best, plus all the rest of his chariots, plus all of his, just foot soldiers. So all the king's horses and all the king's men, basically, which even if they weren't, to the number of
all the king's horses, all the king's men couldn't bring the Israelites back into Egypt again.
That's right. But even if we're not talking about a full 600,000 men, I mean, 600,000 slaves versus, a couple 100,000 of Egyptian fighting soldiers and chariots. I mean, that's not a battle at all. That's a massacre. But, and then later on, we'll see the language where God is fighting for, his pillar of cloud comes between the Israelites and the Egyptian army. He fights for them, is what the Egyptians say. So this is supposed to be a battle scene that we're seeing, and of course the battle is pretty one-sided at the end.
Absolutely. Yeah, that battle scene I think is key in framing the way that we see the Exodus. And it's not just a battle scene of physical nature, that there is going to be a physical battle that's fought here, in a sense, in the fact that one army is destroyed. I think that spiritual battle is going on here as well. God showing his superiority over the gods. And that is something that is just key to understanding what's going on here. Let's begin reading in verse number 5. Alan, you talked about the Lord will fight for you. Let's read up to that point in verse number 14. In Exodus 14 and verse number 5, when the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials shockingly changed their minds about the people and said, "What have we done? We have released Israel from serving us." If I might include here a little commentary, we've just lost our workforce. Why in the world would we have done this? In verse 6, so he got his chariot ready and took his troops with him. He took 600 of the best chariots and all the rest of the chariots of of Egypt, with officers in each one. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the Israelites who were going out defiantly. The Egyptians, and remember describing that a little bit, what had they done in the process of leaving, Alan? What had they gone into their neighbors' houses and done?
It says they plundered. That's the language.
Exactly
they plundered the Egyptians. I mean, the Egyptians gave it to them, but I mean, that's the term used. So again, a military term, not a usual term that you would say.
Absolutely. So they defiantly went out, not just leaving, but taking goods with them as they left. Verse number 9, the Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, his horsemen and his army, chased after them and caught up with them as they camped by the seaside, Hahiroth, in front of Baal Zephon. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians coming after them. And the Israelites were terrified and cried out to the Lord for help, echoing, I think, what we see in the beginning of the book, where they cried out to the Lord whenever the distress that was upon them because of the oppression was overcoming them. Here they cry out to the Lord again, just like we see at the beginning. And they said to Moses, here is, I believe, the first of a series of issues that we're going to see concerning these people. They said to Moses, verse number 11, "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Isn't this what we told you in Egypt? Leave us alone so that we may serve the Egyptians. It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." But Moses said to the people, "Don't be afraid. Stand firm and see the Lord's salvation that he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you must be quiet. Here's the battle scene, Alan. It is the children of Israel making their exit from Egypt. Pharaoh and his officials change their mind. They realize, hey, we want these people to come back. Let's go pursue them, overtake them, bring them back so they might serve us again. The people are scared. They're scared of what's coming up against them. They cry out to the Lord. But it's not just that they cry out to the Lord now, and they just complain here. And they try to get on to Moses. They said, see, we told you shouldn't have done this. You should have just let us serve the Egyptians. Remember, let's go back to what happened in the Exodus story, actually before the Exodus actually takes place, whenever Moses and Aaron had gone into Pharaoh, and they had told them that the Lord said, let his people go. What did Pharaoh do? Well, he made their burden more difficult by taking away the straw and making them pick their own straw. And yet they had to continue making the same amount of bricks in the workday. Well, they said, why don't you just leave us alone? You're making things worse for us. Here they are, I believe, hearkening back to that idea. Why didn't you just leave us here? And yet the Lord, or I guess Moses, we should say, the Lord speaking through Moses, I believe, he gets on to them. Alan, what do you think here about their mindset? Again, as I mentioned, this is the first of many times that they seem to struggle with trust. I guess my question more specifically would be, why are they struggling with trust here, given what they have seen with the plagues?
That's the $1 million question right there. Yeah. I mean, it's just,
that's why we give it to you, Alan. You make the big bucks.
One thing I did notice with the Israelites, they say here, what have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? It kind of reminds me of what the Egyptians say right up here in, verse 5. What have we done?
Yeah.
So you've got two groups of people that are having changes of heart, the Egyptians and Pharaoh. What have we done by letting them go? The people of Israel, what have we done by leaving? Why have we they're changing their heart. So I think you're supposed to maybe equate the two. I mean, these are the children of Israel are no better than these Egyptians. I mean, the Egyptians have seen the exact same signs, if not more, that the Israelites have had. And they continue to harden their hearts. Well, I think we're seeing some hardening a little bit of the Israelites here too. They eventually, it does say they believe in certain places, but, and we'll talk about that in a minute, that belief is not very lasting. It's just it seems like they believe right then, but it's not a lifestyle change, if you would. It's kind of, I like this in verse 12 that, isn't this what we told you in Egypt? Leave us alone so that we may serve the Egyptians. It never says anything about that in the Bible. It's just like, that's one of those statements. Like, did they really say that back then? I'm sure there were probably times where they're like, yeah, go Moses, by the time the 10th plague rolled around, they're, excited that the Egyptians were finally getting their comeuppance. And then, we told you back then, just leave us alone. Don't worry, don't take us out of Egypt. It's better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. It's just, they're lucky they don't have, their Twitter account or, recordings that we can go back and be like, you have said this before, and now you're saying this. And, you can accuse them of being flip-floppers or something. But it's amazing. They're like you said, just their lack of faith. And I think that goes to highlight verses like 13 and 14, that despite all of that, stand firm and watch the Lord's salvation that he will accomplish for you today. I mean, there's no better highlight of the salvation and the 100% how God is 100% involved with that salvation. There's nothing that these Israelites can do to save themselves. It's the Lord that is saving them right here, even despite the Israelites trying to turn back at different times or trying to rebel against Moses over and over again. And yet the Lord and his mercy still, because of his promises, that's what it comes down to. he made a promise that he would bring them out of Egypt. And I highlighted, we didn't get to talk about it, but it mentioned earlier in the passage about Joseph
Oh
and
yes,
how,
we completely skipped over that.
back in at the end of chapter 13, just a little kind of quick blurb, 13 and verse 19 there. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the Israelites swear a solemn oath. God will certainly come to your aid, and you
Yep.
must take my bones from here. I mean, those men back in those days knew that this would happen. God had promised that it would happen, so it's going to happen, even if the Israelites have to be dragged kicking and screaming the whole way.
That's right. And I think the theme of promise keeping is certainly seen in the Exodus story, and the fact that the whole reason the story is taking place is based upon the promise that was made to Abraham all the way back in Genesis chapter 12. And Joseph at the end of his life highlights that the Lord has brought us into this place. Let me see if I can highlight it real fast here. Let's see here. Chapter 50 of Genesis, in verse 24, Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but notice this, God will certainly come to your aid and bring you up from this land to the land he swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Joseph made the sons of Israel take an oath. When God comes to your aid, you are to carry my bones up from here. Joseph knew exactly. He had this understanding of exactly what God was doing here within this story of this people, that he had brought them down in this place to preserve them, but they were not going to remain here. There was still the promise of the promised land, and that the Lord would deliver them. And we talk about the people here having this revisionist history type of mentality here, where they say, hey, you should have just left us there so we could serve the Egyptians. Well, best I can understand, going back to Exodus chapter 1 and verse 11, I read here that the Egyptians assigned taskmasters over the Israelites to oppress them with forced labor. That verse 12, but the more they oppressed them, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. Verse 13, they worked the Israelites ruthlessly, made their lives bitter with difficult work or difficult labor in brick and mortar and all kinds of field work. They ruthlessly imposed all this work upon them. We get to chapter 2 and verse number 24. And we actually verse 23, after a long time, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned because of their difficult labor, and they cried out, and their cry for help because the difficult labor ascended to God, and God heard his groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God saw the Israelites, and God knew. Well, what did he know? We go to chapter 3 and verse number 7, that the Lord said, I have observed the misery of my people in Egypt, have heard them crying out because of their oppressors. I know about their sufferings, and I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians, and to bring them from the land to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Here they are. The Lord is trying to take them to this place. But what are they focused on in this moment? They're not focused on the promise. The promise is of God, that I will take you from this land and I will bring you into this wonderful land, of a land that is described as overflowing with milk and honey. Yet instead of focusing on the promise and trusting in the God who just incredibly showed his power, what do they focus on, Alan? They focus on the army that's pursuing them. And I'll tell you, that is such a lesson for us to consider, especially in what we're facing right now, the difficulties in this life, this moment. What are we focused on? Are we focused on the difficulties that we're facing? Are we focused on the COVID crisis? Are we focused on any unrest within our country? What are we focused on? What we ought to be focused on are the promises of God, that I will never leave you nor forsake you. He said that to these same Israelites. And our Lord Jesus, he promises that same thing for us, that I will be with you. I will strengthen. And Paul says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Whatever he has called us to do in this life that requires service to him, whatever we need to do in his name, he will strengthen us to do. That verse 14 of chapter 14, the Lord will fight for you and you must be quiet. Alan, I think we need to be quiet sometimes. We just need to shut up and let God do what he does.
I wanted to come over here and hold on. I like the ESV because verse 14, the Lord will fight for you and you have only to be silent.
That's all you need to do.
That's all, like, that's it. That's all they have to do. Because what have they been doing up to this point? I mean, they were talking for 2 verses there. Oh, is there graves? Weren't there graves in Egypt? Why didn't you just leave us alone? Blah, 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 blah. They've been talking. They've been, crying out. They've
Whining,
been
complaining, grumbling.
Yeah, I mean, that's which they continue to do. And, what does it say? Stand firm. Do not be afraid. The Lord's going to do this. All you have to do is be silent. Just
shut up.
Let it happen. That's all they have to do is just let it happen. Walk through the water, walk through the Red Sea on dry ground. That's a pretty simple message and simple task for them. And fortunately they do that. But I just imagine, like, what if they just were paralyzed with fear and they didn't walk through the water? Or if they, maybe, I don't know, maybe what if some of them decided they were going to surrender to the Egyptians? So, I mean, what would have happened? Well, they'd have probably been killed. They would not have seen the salvation of the Lord. But the ones that did, that were silent and did follow him, they were saved.
They needed to trust, and they were not trusting in the moment, which a lack of trust is a very clear sign of a lack of faith. They were not lacking for evidence that would have led them to a better faith. They were just focusing on the wrong thing. They were focused on the moment, the difficulty of the moment, instead of the God who had promised that he would take care of them, that he would bring them into the land. So here the Lord he has this opportunity to give them another piece of evidence. He's going to give them one of the strongest pieces of evidence that can be found within the history of Israel. Beginning in verse 15 of Exodus chapter 14, the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to break camp. As for you, lift up your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea, and divide it so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. As for me," so the Lord says, well, that's what I'm going to do. "I am going to harden the hearts of the Egyptians." It's like the 3rd or 4th time we've seen this so far, that idea of hardening their hearts, "so they will go in after them, and I will receive glory by means of Pharaoh, all his army, and his chariots and horsemen. The Egyptians will know." Again, that's the 2nd time we've seen that. Actually, if we go back to chapter 14 and verse 4, that's basically the exact same thing that we're reading here in chapter 14, verses 17 and 18. "The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I receive glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen." Then the angel of God, verse 19, "who was going in front of the Israelite forces, moved and went behind them. The pillar of cloud moved from in front of them and stood behind them. It came between the Egyptian and the Israelite forces. There was cloud and darkness. It lit up the nights, and neither group came near the other all night long. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back with a powerful east wind all that night and turned the sea into dry land. So the waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, and the waters like a wall to them on their right and their left. And the Egyptians set out in pursuit, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen, and went into the sea after them. And during the morning watch, the Lord looked down at the Egyptian forces from the pillar of fire and cloud, and threw the Egyptian forces into confusion. And he caused their chariot wheels to swerve and made them drive with difficulty. Let's get away from Israel, the Israelites said, because the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea so that the water may come back on the Egyptians, on their chariots and horsemen. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea returned to its normal depth. While the Israelites were trying to escape from it, the Lord threw them into the sea. The water came back and covered the chariots and the horsemen, plus the entire army of Pharaoh that had gone after them into the sea. Not even one of them survived. But the Israelites had walked through the sea on dry ground, and the waters like a wall to them on their right and on their left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the power of the Egyptians, And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. And when Israel saw the great power that the Lord used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and believed in him and in his servant Moses. Okay, this is, of course, one of the more well-known stories within the biblical text, not just within the story of the Old Testament and the children of Israel, but just overall throughout the Bible. Is so well known because this is such an incredible event, Alan, just to think about the miraculous feat that is carried out here by the Lord, that he literally divided the sea. That it was almost as if there were some invisible walls that separated the waters. Of course, the way he does it is with a great wind. But just imagine for yourself that you walk out to the nearest big body of water you think of, go out to the river, and all of a sudden the waters just divide in the river, and they have these big walls of water on each side, and you can walk through the riverbed on dry ground, I guess, kind of muddy ground, but nonetheless on ground and not in the water. Just think about how crazy that would be. And yet that's exactly what the Lord does here. And there are so many, Alan, things that we see in this text that go back and address what we've already read. And I just think it's an incredible story. But why don't you share with the audience some insights that you have here?
I love the imagery of God fighting for them,
Right.
And
yes, absolutely.
And how he separates different groups throughout this narrative. First, we see the angel of God, verse 19, moved and went between the Israelite forces and the Egyptian forces, and he stood there. So there's cloud and darkness, verse 20. It lit up the night. Neither group came near the other. So he's separating, he's dividing, he's placing himself in the path of Egypt, taking the brunt of their attack and defending his son, defending Israel. And then you still have yet another separation. You have this wall that goes up between the path of safety that the Israelites passed through the Red Sea, and what we see is certain death in the Red Sea. I mean, when that wall disappears and that water comes back, anything that's in that path is dead. All the Egyptians were dead. So yet again, another just separation, another force that the Lord does to keep his people safe. And I think we've seen this idea of division and separation already several times throughout the Bible. We have just God's people just being separated from those that were not part of the promise or part of the plan. Brothers being separated, Esau and Jacob, Jacob remaining in Canaan, Esau being separated away, Ishmael being separated from Isaac, just all the wicked people of the world being separated from Noah and the flood. So just this is what God does. He sees that there is evil, and he sees his people that he has promised, his remnant that he has promised to protect, and he places himself between them, basically. Absolutely. And separates the two to keep the one, and the purpose is to keep the one holy. And that's the point of these next couple books. Is he is separated. The first act is the separation of Israel from Egypt, and now he is going to make them a holy nation, and make them even not just separate physically, but separate spiritually as well. And that's our calling today. That's what we're supposed to do. We have been called out. We are a holy priesthood. We have been sanctified. And so we are called to be holy people, separate ourselves, put on Christ, put on this new man of God, and separate those, our wicked past, separate that sin, take that away from us. So again, just what we see here in just a small microcosm is just a theme that permeates the entire scriptures.
I want to notice a few reversals that we see here within this text. As you just mentioned, there's this idea of separation. Think about that taking place within the plagues as well. how many times have we seen the plagues where there was a plague against the people of the Egyptians and their land and their possessions? And yet, what does it say? But the Lord did not cause this to happen on his people or on their land, that nothing of their livestock died in the carrying out of these plagues. That shows the difference here. I want to look at a reversal that takes place. Let's see here. Let's look at verse number 3, chapter 14, verse number 3. After the Lord tells them to hang out here within this place, Pharaoh will say of the Israelites, they are wandering in the land, they are wandering around the land in confusion. Now skip over chapter 14 and verse number 24. During the morning watch, the Lord looked down at the Egyptians' forces from the pillar of fire and cloud and threw the Egyptian forces into confusion. They thought that it was God's people that didn't know what was going on. It was God's people that were not aware of what they need to be doing. Well, in the end, they were the ones thrown into confusion. Why? Well, why were they confused? Well, they were confused, number one, because they thought they could overtake God and his people. But notice that this confusion and the difficulty that came from the chariot wheels were swerving, and they're having a really hard time driving. And they came to this realization at this time in verse 25, let's get away from Israel. The Egyptians said, because the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. What did Moses tell the people in verse 14 of chapter 14? The Lord will fight for you, and you must be quiet. I want to notice, Alan, what are the people of Israel doing during all this?
They're just watching, basically. I guess they're silent at this point. Thank goodness. Finally, they've been told to be quiet, so they're just watching, and I'm sure they're freaking out, really. But they're observing. They can see everything that's happening before them.
Exactly. There is no doubt at all in their minds, or in the minds of the Egyptian at this point, that any of this that is taking place is of the effort and power of the people. Notice they're not saying that the cry out of the Egyptians isn't that, oh, look, they're fighting back, they're so strong. No, it's about God. God, the Lord, is fighting for them against Egypt. They're over there on this other side, just kind of hanging out and observing what's going on. They are, as you said, they're being quiet. You have only to be silent. Maybe they're, silently cheering, go God, in this whole thing that's going on. But more than likely, as you said, their jaws are probably on the floor. They're probably, even considering everything that they've seen up to this point, again, just try to put yourself in their shoes as they're sitting there on dry ground, watching what is taking place. How could you be doing anything which, like, whoa, like just silent? You must be quiet. I don't know if it's necessarily that they chose to be quiet or the fact they just didn't know what to say. This seems to be a scene to me where they are just left absolutely speechless of the great power and might of God that is on full display at this very moment. There is no doubt who has the power in this situation. It is all God. In fact, verse 31, when Israel saw the great power of the Lord against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and believed in him and in his servant Moses. I think that's an extremely fitting end to this particular scene here in Exodus chapter 14. What do you have to add, Alan? Anything?
I was going to say, since the time that they were told to be silent, I don't even know if Moses says anything in the scriptures, but
no, I think all he does is stretch out his hand the entire time.
Yeah,
The Lord talks to him in verses 15 through 18, but I think that's it.
Yeah, I was going to check. Yeah, so from that verse, so verse 14, I'll fight for you. All you have to do is be quiet. Not even Moses has any words spoken in scripture. And the first word spoken by Moses or the Israelites is chapter 15, which is just a song of praise, which, what else could you do? What other words are there except to sing praise, give glory to God. I will sing to the Lord, chapter 15, verse 1, for he is highly exalted. Mm-hmm. I would hope that I would have that same reaction too. Just there are no words except praising God.
And that's something that we see in the New Testament. It just brings my mind Romans chapter 8, that there are times when either the circumstances or what we see God doing just leaves us without anything to say. And the thing is, that's okay. It's okay to not always have something to say in the moment. Although here in Exodus 15, their response is fantastic. And this is a well-known text throughout the history of the Hebrew people. And let's read this text together, Alan. Exodus 15 in verse 1, this is known as Israel's song, or the song of Moses, that Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord, which to me, that makes me think, well, how do they all know what to sing together? But, that's neither here nor there. This is what they said. I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. He has thrown the horse. And notice the number of times here, as we read together, the number of times they allude back to exactly what just happened. They allude to what has taken place and the results, the understanding that they gain from what has taken place. That what they have seen has led to this level of faith, and this is what results within them. So I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. He has thrown the horse and its rider into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him, my God, my Father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. He threw Pharaoh's chariots and his army into the sea. The elite of his officers were drowned in the Red Sea. The floods covered them. They sank to the depth like a stone. Lord, your right hand is glorious in power. Lord, your right hand shattered the enemy. You overthrew your adversaries by your great majesty. You unleashed your burning wrath. It consumed them like stubble. The water heaped up at the blast from your nostrils. The current stood firm like a dam. The watery depths congealed in the heart of the sea. And the enemy said, I will pursue. I will overtake. I will divide the spoil. My desire will be gratified at their expense. I will draw my sword. My hand will destroy them. But you, speaking of the Lord, you blew with your breath, and the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. Notice the result now. Notice what they had said. The Egyptians had said, this is what we're going to do. Notice what had happened there in verse number 10. Notice the result, the conclusion they come to, verse number 11. Lord, who is like you among the gods? Who is like you, glorious in holiness, revered with praises, performing wonders? You stretched out your right hand, and the Lord swallowed and the earth swallowed them. With your faithful love, you will lead the people you have redeemed. You will guide them to your holy dwelling with your strength. When the people hear, they will shudder. Anguish will seize the inhabitants of Philistia. Then the chiefs of Edom will be terrified, trembling, will seize the leaders of Moab. All the inhabitants of Canaan will panic. They will be as still as a stone, terror and dread will fall on them. They will be as still as a stone because of your powerful arm, until your people pass by, Lord, until the people whom you purchased pass by. You will bring them in and plant them on the mountains of your possession. Lord, you have prepared the place for your dwelling. Lord, your hands have established the sanctuary. The Lord will reign forever and ever. And when the Pharaoh's horses with his chariots and horsemen went into the sea, the Lord brought the waters of the sea back over them. But the Israelites walked through the sea on dry ground. Then the prophetess Miriam, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women came out following her with tambourines and dancing. Miriam sang to them, sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. He has thrown the horse and its rider into the sea. Alan, this is just a fantastic text, a text rich with just plain understanding. And sometimes we might overlook the importance of just simply acknowledging what the Lord has done, taking the evidence and letting the evidence bring us to a conclusion. That seems to be something that is very clear here within this text. They recognize what had taken place, and it led them to a proper conclusion.
I highlighted verses 14 through 16 because this is a portion that will play a role later on. But
Mm-hmm.
uh,
That's
we've
right.
talked about the purpose of all of this was for God to be glorified. He mentioned this, I think, at least 3 times just in the we saw today.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I will do this so that my name will be glorified, or that I will have glory, I will have honor. All of this was for God to be glorified, and that glory would spread throughout the earth. The people are going to hear that, and they're going to shudder. They're going to be terrified. Their hearts will be like stone, and that's exactly what's going to happen. That's what Rahab talks about when the 2 spies come into Jericho, and she's already heard about all the great things that have happened to the Israelites, and that's 40 years after the fact. So they know exactly that the people of Canaan were in a panic. They knew that this was coming, and I think we should highlight the reactions of this great feat of salvation. You have one group of people, the Israelites, that react with praise and joy and dancing because of the salvation. Well, how will other groups that are not part of God's people react? Well, the same act of salvation brings terror, brings panic,
Yep.
brings death to the Egyptians. So it's the same act, but 2 different results. And the only difference is, I think, right up here, the end of chapter 14 and verse 31, the people feared the Lord and believed. And of course, that people was the chosen people that God had promised to save. So if we fear the Lord and we believe, then what else is there but to become part of that chosen people? That's the only thing left. And of course, this pivotal moment passing through the water is of course mentioned throughout the Bible, but I specifically wanted to highlight 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Let me get over there real
All
quick.
right, that's great. Yes, that's a great connection.
Yeah, 1 Corinthians chapter 10 is pretty important because it talks about this event in the context of the New Testament.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I do not want you to be unaware, chapter 10, verse 1, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud, all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. And they all ate the same spiritual food, all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them, since they struck them down in the wilderness. So Paul here equates this event with our own salvation, our own passing through the waters of baptism, and he even places our Savior in that same spot. They drank from, well, we won't read it this time, but next class we'll read about the water from the rock. They
Mm-hmm.
drank from the same spiritual living water that we do today, and that rock was Christ. So what they are doing here is what we still do. We still are saved from the forces of evil, the Egyptians or Satan. We are still saved from that by a great salvation that God brings. And what basically what are we told to do? They were told something simple: be silent, and then it's implied, pass through the Red Sea. What are we to do? Just believe, be silent, pass through the waters of baptism. It's as simple as that. Paul puts it as good as anyone can here, just to equate these two.
To give a text that comes to my mind is Psalm 74 and verses 12 through 17. This is a psalm of Asaph, a Maskil of Asaph, which I believe is a teaching sort of psalm, something to remind people of something very important. I think about Psalm 74, verse 12. God, my King, is from ancient times, performing saving acts on the earth. You notice you divided the sea with your strength. You smashed the heads of the sea monsters in the water. You crushed the heads of Leviathan. You fed him to the creatures of the desert. You opened up springs and streams. You dried up ever-flowing rivers. Your day is yours, also the night, or excuse me, the day is yours, also the night. You established the moon and the sun. You set all the boundaries of the earth. You made summer and winter. There's allusions here, not only, I believe, to this story in Exodus, the dividing of the sea, but there's also creation themes that are seen here within this text. So what is the point? The point is, who has the power? Well, it is God. Well, why does God have the power? Well, go back and read about the Exodus. Read about the power that he showed over the power of that day, which would have been Pharaoh and the gods that he represented, that supposedly endowed him with power. What did he do? Well, he struck them down as if they were nothing. We'll go back to the beginning. What did God do in the beginning? Well, he took that which was nothing, or as some understand that, which was chaos and not uniform, and he brought peace. It says here in the text that the day is yours, the night is yours, the moon, the sun, the boundaries of the earth, the seasons, all those are creation themes that are seen here. God is seen to be as Exodus 15 and verse 11 says. He asked the question, Lord, who is like you among the gods? Now, to me, I've sort of changed the way I look at this, just this whole theme within the Old Testament of Yahweh God against the gods of the peoples. I used to look at it and think, well, of course, here it's just it's almost a silly question because there's no other gods. There's no other beings or anything of that nature. So of course God is God. But if that is the case, then that doesn't make this text as powerful as if there are other powers that were present at this time. And I think there's evidence for that within the Old Testament, looking at the divine council, and think about the sons of God that are described in Job chapter 1, that on the day that the sons of God gathered together, there among them was, of course, God, but then also among them was the evil one, was Satan. I think that gives us a framework then that there were other supernatural beings that were present at this time and active in some way. Well, what has God seen? What has God shown in this? That who is among you like the gods? Well, no one is. Why? Because his power is so superior to them. He is supreme among them. Whatever they might try to do, he does better. Now, if he truly is the only God, like what I mean by that is if he is the only one that exists, well, then he wins by default. But if there are other beings with some sort of power that he has given them, and yet he is usurping, he is establishing his power here over them, to me, that has more weight behind it. And I think that is something that can be seen throughout the Old Testament if we look at it from that particular perspective. But here's one of the problems, Alan. One of the problems is we live in 2020 and we live in the 21st century, and we are so far removed from the supernatural that we often have a hard time seeing the Bible from a supernatural context. And we look at this and we see it from our perspective, where there's not really visible supernatural things happening right now, as there were even in the first century. And therefore we divorce that from the text. And we then read this verse, who is among you, or who is like you among the gods? Well, no one, because you're the only God. Well, yes, he is the only God, but is he the only supernatural being that was active at this time? That's the question I'll leave with the audience, just to let them chew on it and think about it and do their own study and research into. All right. That gets us to the end. Alan, what do you have? You got anything on the prophetess Miriam, about her tambourine and her dancing that you want to highlight?
Oh, you want me to talk about dancing? Is that right?
Does Annabelle have a theatrical representation that she could show us with the
we could probably come up with one, I'm sure.
Maybe Melanie want to get into that too.
you don't want to see that for sure, but Annabelle could pull something out. It's one thing I saw I didn't really realize, but notice this song that Miriam sings in verse 21 is, of course, pretty much the same beginning.
Oh, yes, that's a good catch.
As that one. So I didn't realize, but it doesn't say that Moses wrote the song. It just says that Moses and the Israelites sang the song. So I think there's some that actually attribute the writing of this to Miriam, which is kind of a fun bookend. I mean, we've started off the book of Exodus with actually two women, a lot of
Oh,
women playing a
that's
role.
good.
The two midwives, followed by Moses' mother and Miriam herself at the beginning when Moses was brought out of the water and given to and raised by Pharaoh's daughter. So you have, I mean, that's four different women just right at the beginning before any man comes along, and then right here you kind of have that bookend here, and just highlighting Miriam, Aaron and Moses' sister, as possibly even writing this song of praise, which isn't uncommon. I know Deborah wrote a song after their great victory in the book of Judges. Mary, the Magnificat, and Mary delivers a song that she writes after learning about that she would give birth to Jesus. So this is kind of a common thing that happens throughout the text.
She is referred here as a prophetess, so there is some connection that she does have with the Lord, and maybe this is a song that was given to her by the Lord, and this was something that he put on her in order to express to the people. And maybe it was that this whole thing was a result of her writing. Don't know for certain. That's good to bring up, though. Yeah, to me, just looking at this again, the question I have is, I wonder what this looked like in the moment as this was taking place, because was it? Again, we got to look at this from our type of singing, that we all sing the same things at the same time, but maybe it was more that she was singing a particular thing and the people repeated it. She would sing another line and people repeat that as well. I don't quite know for certain, but it's just such a cool thing to think about, to put yourself, to try to just try, because we can't, but we just try to put ourselves in that moment, try to think what they're thinking, feel what they're feeling, and seeing this just incredible scene that is unfolded before them. But notice, when God's power and strength is shown in full force, there is only one proper reaction, and that proper reaction is to give glory. And actually, I want to bring this 14 and verse 4. Then I will receive glory by the means of Pharaoh and all his army. Go over to verse, let's see here. Verse 14, or chapter 14 and verse 18. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I what? I receive glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. What do we see here in chapter 15 and verses 1 through 21, basically? We see his glory being proclaimed. It is a natural result when God's power and might is seen to raise, even immediately, if we have the opportunity to immediately raise up glory to his name for what he has shown us. Alan, what do you have in conclusion for our study today?
If you ask me what I picture as this moment, I just think of the end of Return of the Jedi when all the Ewoks are dancing around.
That is well, all right, that's it. We're done.
There you go. We're done. We're good. Star Wars reference.
That's a perfect ending for today. That is one of my favorite scenes in Star Wars by far. Those things are so stinking cute. and it's what's funny with the Ewoks is that you have like the highlight of the series whenever they're all cute and being cuddly, but then it just hits you in the pit of a stomach whenever one of them gets shot or something. Oh, it's the two extremes concerning the Ewoks. But yeah, Alan, thank you so much. Thank you for your good insight today, and thank you for those who have joined us in this study today, whether you are on Facebook or are on YouTube. Thank you so much, and we hope that you've been benefited by your time with us today. That you, even though this is not something that we have experienced, we did not experience this scene that surrounded the Red Sea, we get to read about it right now. And through reading about it and through our faith and trusting in God, we have confidence that this is something that took place, that this is a part of history. And what we're reading here is not just some fanciful story, but it is history, that this did take place. And the glory that is given to God by the Israelites here, we too can replicate. We can give God glory for the deliverance that he gave to this people, because it is this deliverance that continued on the story that's going to develop into the people finally entering the land, that's going to develop in the nation of Israel, throughout their history, and of course is all leading to the Christ coming into this world, giving his life for us, being buried and being raised on the third day. This story is a part of our story as Christians, and I hope that you've been encouraged by your participation with us today. Alan, thank you so much as always for your great teaching and sharing insights with us. We'll pick up on Tuesday in Exodus chapter 15 and verse 22. And I don't quite know, Alan, what you have as the other bookends.
I think we'll get through the end of chapter 18, if I remember right.
Let's see.
So,
actually, I have it right here.
Jethro. So finish up chapter 15 and then all the way through 18. That'll get us right
That's
up
right.
to the.
Yep.
That'll get us right up to Mount Sinai.
That's right. That's what I see on the paper. Great. Well, we hope you'll join us for that. And if for those of you who are in the Jackson area, if you're looking for a church to worship with on Sunday, we're going to be jumping on the outside church bandwagon on Sunday. We'll be conducting our service in our parking lot. If you would like to join us for that, please feel free to do so. Just show up and we'll give you some instructions for exactly how that is being carried out. We would love for you to worship with us in that way. And we're excited for that. The weather looks like it's going to be fantastic. Very, very cool for a July, for a
Providential.
I mean, we might get spoiled, honestly. This very first Sunday might be perfect. And then whenever you show up the next Sunday and it's a nice 90 degrees with 267% humidity, we'll maybe rethink how nice it was. But we are looking forward to that. And that's going to be at 9:00. For those who are joining with us, we're going to get out there early to try to beat whatever heat might come down on us. This Sunday, 9:00 in our parking lot, we're going to be worshiping. We'll hope that you'll show up and join us in that. Come a little early. That way you can have some time to get set up, and we'll be passing out Lord's Supper emblems. We'll be passing out some song packets that we'll be singing from, and an outline and a bulletin, all that kind of stuff. So make sure you show up a little bit early so you can be prepared for our time together, worshiping God right out front of our church house here at 384 Pleasant Plains Road in Jackson, Tennessee. Thank you again for joining us. May God bless you throughout the rest of this Friday. May He bless you this weekend. And again, if you're looking for a place to worship, come worship with us Sunday at 9 a.m. Alan, thank you so much again, brother. And we look forward to seeing you again and our audience, those who study with us this upcoming Tuesday as we continue to walk through history, the story of God within His Word. Take care.